Welcome back, barbarians. Last couple of episodes have been pointing at problems. I see it, I know it, and I want to deliver something actionable this time and trying to answer some of the questions that I've been getting in the feedback, which I really do appreciate, by the way. I try to stay organized, but stuff gets away from me, and this is not my full time income or income of any kind. But the feedback mostly centered on you guys feeling like, yeah, no kidding, I can relate to that problem. Now what? So that's what this is going to be about, the now what. Episode one was about expectations, that gap between where we think life is supposed to be and what we think we're owed, and what actually life looks like right now. How suffering, resilience, and perspective shape us, whether we want them to or not. Episode two was about marriage, the difference between a covenant and a contract, the cracks that show up in relationships that point at something deeper underneath when it starts to shift. Both episodes were really circling the same question. What happens when you drift off course from the design for your life? What happens when you wake up one day and you realize you're not where you thought you would be at this point, right? Maybe the marriage, the career, the faith all feel a little bit off. Or maybe you can't even quite put your finger on it. You just know that something isn't right. And honestly, that might be the most frustrating version of this whole thing, the not quite knowing. Something just isn't aligned. In steps the world to offer you a fix for the low price of $150 a month or some new prescription, but you're staying busy, productive, paying the bills, showing up, exhausted, but present and accounted for. But if you're honest with yourself, you know that you're moving without a direction, drifting at sea with no rudder, and the fuel gauge is not looking great. A lot of people spend years there, decades even. Some even set up permanent residence and start redecorating the place. And because they're functioning, surviving, checking all the boxes, the calendar's full, they convince themselves everything is just fine. Until one day, they realize they've been climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall the whole time. And the thought of climbing back down and starting over feels so overwhelming that they just buy into the lie, that Timu version of life that they could have had, and call it their new normal now. So today we're going to get after that, our purpose, not the Instagram version, not the feel good stuff that whatever motivational speaker's trending about this week, not the quit your job, move to California to find yourself version, though if you're from California, please stay there. Uh, I'm talking about finding real purpose, the kind that pushes you through the storm, the kind that gives you direction when your emotions are unreliable, and they always are, honestly. The identity that tells you who you are when the culture is screaming 1,000 different answers at you and putting them on speed dial in your feed. Because if we're honest, Americans have been under attack in this area for a long time. Politics and big daddy government are not the answer here. Identity and purpose are things that we have to identify for ourselves and then decide whether our current situation actually serves us in that purpose or whether something needs to change. Every business, agency, institution around us is competing to tell us who we are. Social media, advertising, corporations, political movements, influencers, the algorithms. Everyone wants your attention because attention eventually becomes money, and money, in most people's worldview, eventually becomes power. It's been my experience with most activists and social justice groups that they are far less concerned with the equality they sell and more concerned when they're going to get their turn. They think that they're owed their turn in the driver's seat to be the oppressor, the entitled, the elite that they think is the easy life portrayed by Hollywood. They don't understand heavy is the crown because they've never had to wear that weight of leadership at that level. You're being studied, your behavior is being tracked, your preferences are being recorded and measured, your fears, your passions, your vulnerabilities are all being cataloged. And artificial intelligence is now targeting people with a level of precision we've never seen before in history, ever. So wake up. Your purpose is out there, and you can't find the road for all the bright lights in your face. This isn't random. The battle for your attention and your habits is real. Because if someone can control what you pay attention to, they can eventually influence what you believe. And if they can influence what you believe, they can influence what you become. So people spend years looking for themselves while consuming content specifically designed to keep them distracted. So it's no wonder we're exhausted, anxious, confused, and over-medicated in this country and abroad. Everybody's asking, how do I find my purpose? But I think that's actually the wrong question. The better question is, what if purpose isn't something that you find through self-discovery and throwing things at the wall to see what sticks? What if purpose is revealed through discipline and obedience? Which I know sounds counterintuitive in a world that tells you to be everything for everyone and live your best life. YOLO, right? But think about it. If you try to be everything for everyone, you won't be anything for the people that actually rely on you, the people you admire most. Are they jacks of all trades, or have they mastered themselves and their disciplines? I don't for a second believe that we're here as accidents. I don't accept that we're here by chance, a bunch of atoms randomly bouncing around creating and shaping history. It's ridiculous. We were sent on mission by the Creator. There is a purpose behind the design, and it's ours to discover. And I believe every one of us, you included, has been given an assignment, whether we've figured that out for ourselves yet or not. Now, that assignment may change over seasons, no different than a soldier's career. The mission of a young man out in the world being shaped and tested isn't always the same mission that he's going to find himself as a husband or a father. The mission of a father isn't always the same as an older man pouring into the next generation. The season, the place, the responsibilities, they shift. But the point remains. You were not sent here randomly. You were sent here intentionally. And if that's true, then purpose isn't something that you invent for yourself. It's something that you discover. Not through your feelings, and certainly not through indulgence and comfort, not through endless self-analysis and no action, no skin in the game. You find it through discipline, through obedience, through paying careful attention to the things that you've been entrusted with, by becoming the kind of person capable of carrying the cross of your particular story, with all of its unique responsibilities, suffering, pain, but also joy, happiness, love, and heartbreak, all attached to your calling. So this is really good news. You're on your purpose, or it's out there for you to discover. That should bring us some relief, because it's not on us to invent it. We don't have to become our own gods. That's not our job, right? And I also want to say it's not all or nothing here. You could be the world's most brilliant athlete, but because of your life choices and things that came your way and hardship, you find yourself coaching Little League soccer. That's not nothing. It's also not giving you the drive and the motivation to get out of bed every morning. Or another example, you're built to teach the world, and somewhere along the way, you settled for an HR job pushing quarterly training assignments. Social media has given everyone the idea that they have to be influencing the world, all the world, to be a success. That's way too much pressure. What's in front of you? You can steward the 2 or 3 in front of you. Focus on that. We're not talking about working to feed your jealousy over the next bright toy or gadget, or your greed for money being the driving motivation for your desire to be promoted. We're talking about finding your purpose, whatever that is, and living in it. There's a woman at McDonald's drive-thru in downtown Dothan, Alabama. I wish I knew her name to give her credit, but I don't go there very often, just when I get a craving for a morning breakfast burrito. But every time I have, I leave with a smile and feeling blessed. She's always energetic, handing out her tracts, and a blessing for everyone. I don't know her story, but I know what I don't see. I don't see someone focused on the next thing or what could have been. She's in the moment and she's making the most out of it. That kind of thing is contagious. The point is that if you've drifted, you're not dead in the water. Course corrections happen every day. Pilots make them when the weather changes. Ship captains make them when currents shift. Even entire nations make them. The question isn't whether you've drifted. We all do. The question is whether you're willing to be honest enough to admit it and disciplined enough to correct it. I'm in the middle of one of those corrections myself as I transition into another season of my life. So, anyway, enough of that. If I keep going, honestly, it's going to be the whole show and uh, maybe the longest intro ever. So, strap in. All right, before we go any further, we need to call out the biggest deception being sold about your purpose right now. The lie is that purpose is something that you create, that you manufacture it, that if you just think hard enough, travel enough, read enough books, attend enough conferences, stare at enough sunsets, and journal your feelings, eventually you'll dig up that hidden version of yourself that was buried in there all along. Manifest it into life because, hey, you are, after all, the god of your own story, right? Not even remotely close, guys. And look, some of those things have real value. A well timed trip can clear your head. A good mentor can shove you in the right direction when you need it. A great book can give you language for something that you've been living through and couldn't name. Life experience is invaluable. And we all know there are some things that can't be taught, they just have to be lived, painful as they can be. But somewhere along the way, you've become obsessed with the self discovery journey while becoming completely disconnected from the self discipline that actually makes any of it work in the real world. We demand clarity and absolute certainty before making our move, payment before commitment, guarantees before any sacrifice, and life just doesn't work that way. I've watched people spend years trying to find themselves. A decade slips away, and the whole time there were responsibilities sitting right in front of them: a spouse, children, a career, a need in their communities, skills that needed developing for a purpose that was already quietly revealing itself through the very things that they'd already been entrusted with. But because the answer wasn't dramatic enough, wasn't Instagram worthy, they ignored it. Because that's what we want, right? We want the Hollywood moment, the lightning bolt from the sky to confirm it. And we want God to part the clouds, point a finger down, and tell us exactly what we're supposed to do for the next 30 years of our lives. And don't get me wrong, that would certainly make things easier. Terrifying, for sure, but it would definitely clear things up. But most of life just doesn't work like that. Most of life looks a lot more like faithfulness, showing up, paying your dues, doing the next right thing, then doing it again tomorrow. I was listening to an interview recently between Tim Ferriss and Jim Collins. Some of you may know Jim Collins from Good to Great, fantastic book. And I got his new one, which a lot of this content comes from, that he was talking to Tim Ferriss about in that interview. He's a genuinely brilliant guy and somebody who frankly gives me a little bit of hope at my age that I might just be warming up. Because the man says that he has more energy at 68 than he did at 37. And based on the interviews that I've seen him in recently, I believe him. He talked in this conversation about what he calls encodings, patterns, themes, things that keep showing up throughout your life, things that you're naturally drawn toward, things that seem to pull you in a certain direction over and over again. Not because somebody told you to, not because it was profitable, certainly not because it was popular, but because it's just there. Every time that you look up from your busy work, like a thread running through the story. And Colin's definition is worth sitting with for a little bit. He describes encodings as durable capacities that reside within you, waiting for discovery through the experiences of life. Now, the key is, because I said before, it's not something that we invent for ourselves or sit down and just wait to come up by journaling and all that, right? This is not invented by you, but they're there to be discovered through action. He goes on to say something I found both convicting and oddly encouraging at the same time. He says, most of us will come to the end of our lives with vast swaths of our encodings never being discovered. The galaxy inside of you, which I thought was a really cool metaphor, is bigger than any one life can fully explore. He uses this image of a vast galaxy of encodings inside every single person. And at any given moment, your life is like a window frame looking out over that galaxy. Sometimes the window frame captures a big, bright cluster of those encodings. You're in frame, as he puts it. Things click, energy goes up, the work feels like it's coming from somewhere inside of you with inexhaustible depth. You're back, baby, right? And then the window shifts. Maybe through circumstances, maybe through a fearful choice, maybe through something that you never saw coming, and suddenly you're out of frame again. The encodings are still there. They haven't disappeared, but your life isn't lined up with them right now. He uses John Glenn as an example for someone who found his encodings. Glenn's parents were people that wanted him in the family business or maybe medicine. Chemistry, physics, completely out of frame with what got him out of bed in the morning. Things just weren't clicking. I think a lot of us can relate to that at some point. Then the opportunity to train for a government paid license, pilot's license, almost fell in his lap by accident, and it changed everything. The moment he got into the cockpit, it was like a lock turning. Something they actually tested later in his career, they put him under extreme danger and immense speed. His heart rate went down, not up, as you would imagine most people's would. It went down because he was in his encoding. He was home, and that specifically I can relate to. The long days, the phone buzzing, the wife needs something, the kids, the doctor appointments, the PowerPoints due, eating right, working out. It's all good and necessary stuff, but it isn't what fills the bucket for me or anyone that I know of, although living within your purpose is so much more than surviving the day. Glenn couldn't have learned that from a textbook. He couldn't have known it was there until circumstances put him in a position to discover it. He became an astronaut eventually, the most decorated in American history. And then Kennedy pulled him out of that rotation, felt he was too valuable as a national hero to risk on a moon mission. And Glenn spent the next decade at Royal Crown Cola. In the interview, Collins likes to point out that this time spent at Royal Crown Cola represents about 10% of Glenn's life. But it wasn't what he was passionate about. It only shows up as 0.2% of his memoir. Not much to report there. He was still John Glenn, but the window frame had shifted. He was out of frame. And then the Senate came along and his frame shifted again. Most of us can look back and find our own version of that. Seasons where something clicked and you didn't fully know why. And seasons where you were going through the motions and nothing seemed to work out, no matter how much you put into it. Collins was asked by Tim Ferriss if you had 100 points to split between discovering your encodings and trusting the ones that you've already glimpsed, how would you split them? He put them 70 into trust. His reasons were pretty simple and true enough. We're getting clues all the time. The problem is we don't trust what we're seeing when we see it. That question of where have I dropped the ball in the past will drive you insane if you allow it. So best not dwell on it that much. More than anything, we learn how to identify it from now on and move on from here, from wherever here is. When I look back over my own life, there are patterns that were obvious long before I ever had language for them. I knew from a very young age that I wanted to protect people. I didn't know what that meant. I'd watch movies, read comic books, study military history, and treat it all as if it was training material. Like I was somehow preparing for something I couldn't yet see. I assumed most people were generally decent. I assumed the bad guys looked like the bad guys in the comic books. And I assumed that evil would announce itself when it walked into the room with a 10-minute monologue of their diabolical plan. Like most things in my life, I learned the hard way that I was very, very wrong. Turns out evil is often a lot harder to find than that. It hides in plain sight, often right next to you, because we become so desensitized to it in our presence. The people who need protecting don't always look like victims. And the toughest lesson, the one that took me the longest, is that the hardest battle usually isn't against the monster out there. It's against the monster in here. The pride and anger, the selfishness, my lust, the stench of fear and excuses. The part of you that wants all the rewards without any of the responsibility. That monstrous, entitled little boy has done more damage to me and my life than any enemy I've ever actually faced in the field. And I think most of us, if we're being honest, would probably say the same. Jordan Peterson said something years ago that I couldn't agree with more. He said, "A harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a dangerous man who has that danger under voluntary control." Weakness isn't a virtue. Being incapable of causing harm isn't the same thing as choosing restraint. The goal isn't to eliminate strength. The goal is to take that strength, build it to its peak, and then bring it under complete and disciplined control. Because when the monster is uncontrolled, it turns on you and the things that you love. When it is controlled, it can protect everything that you hold dear. It takes a monster to deal with the monsters coming after you and the people that you love. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. His rod and his staff, they comfort me. They comfort me because my God is bigger and badder than anything else out there by far. And I live in his loving grace. What an amazing blessing to reflect on, guys. And it's there that purpose started showing up in my life. Not in my fantasies, not in my feelings. It was in my disciplines. Like searching for something in a murky riverbank, right? You have to stand still, let the water settle to see anything. It was there in the things that I was willing to carry, in the responsibilities I couldn't seem to hand off. The thread was protection, long before I understood what that meant. But I don't want to church it up. I'm not talking about Hollywood glamour shots of a hero riding off into the sunset to the crowd's applauses. In reality, those with this calling know it's a lot of work, frustrating work, being oriented on protecting the community, the sheep, while everyone else seems to live in complete naivety to the wolves standing in the crowd with them. They invite them in most of the time. So, I mean, yes, we live in a very safe society, possibly the safest in history. But it's only that way because those guys know that if they cross the line, bigger, badder guys will show up in minutes. That whole defund the police thing, I mean, yeah, until you need them, right? Tell you what, you got an issue with how the police are doing things, join them. Do it differently. That's how you do change, guys. We need our brothers and sisters in blue, and they need us as well. Anyway, my path jumped around a bit. Farm kid, troublemaker, father, husband, investigator, attack helicopter pilot, airline pilot, instructor pilot, different church ministries, being the founder of Mission 991. These were separate chapters. They were iterations of the same struggle. Different posts, same overall job assignment, right? The mission, the medal didn't change. The details changed. The day-to-day stayed consistent. Most people have a similar thread running through their own lives. The problem is they overlook it because it doesn't seem dramatic enough. They assume that purpose should announce itself with fireworks. One of those old guys singing telegrams, or the tense orchestra music building up in the movies when something important is just about to happen. Instead, it usually shows up quietly through the problems that bother you more than they seem to bother anyone else around you. The righteous anger you feel toward a particular wrong when nobody else seems to care in the room. The burdens you keep picking up even when nobody asked you to, and nobody is going to give you any credit for doing it. People are weird like that. They often dismiss the very things that they're naturally wired for. We assume that because something comes more easily to us, it must not be that important. But often that's exactly where the clue is. The thing that seems obvious to you is not so obvious to everyone else. The skill you take for granted is the thing that somebody else has spent years trying to build up. That's not an accident. Purpose and responsibility are a lot more intertwined than most people give them credit for. We've been sold this idea that purpose is primarily about self-expression and self-fulfillment. Me, 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 me. But when I look at people I most respect, that's not what I see at all. I see people who have become deeply committed to something outside of themselves, their family, their community, their craft, their faith, their team, their mission. They ask, how can I serve? Not, what can you do for me? And here's the thing. The moment that you stop asking what life owes you and start asking what has been placed in your care, the fog starts to lift. The path doesn't suddenly become easy, not by a long shot, but it usually becomes a whole lot clearer. A lot like the bottom of the riverbank, right? And all of a sudden, the struggle isn't something that you're afraid to throw yourself into. It's something there that you can bend down and pick up. Pardon the interruption, barbarians. If you haven't already, a like, follow, or subscribe goes a long way and costs you nothing. This show, the Dapper Barbarian Show, is my own project. This is something that I pour myself into because I truly believe in these conversations. If you want to help make that better, our Patreon link is attached, and your support there goes a long way to allowing me to invest more into the show, be more hands-on with you, and to grow this thing the right way. So thank you to all of you that do. Separately, I want to take a moment for something that's far, far more important than this podcast. I want to thank you genuinely to all of you that continue to support Mission 991. You're the reason that we continue to stay in the fight, and your faithfulness matters a lot more than you know. For those of you who are new to the cause, in 2022, I founded Mission 991, an anti-trafficking and exploitation nonprofit that was born out of a need that I couldn't just walk past. Edmund Burke once said, "All it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing." We can't do it all, but we can continue to do the next right thing, in hopes that it creates space for someone to begin to heal. Sex and labor trafficking is a three-part industry, a three-legged stool, if you will, and it stands on a trafficker, the client, and the victim. Each of those legs requires its own strategic response, but the end goal is always the same: freedom from abuse, exploitation, and addiction. At Mission 991, we partner with agencies and tailor our response to where that need is greatest: education and awareness, field digital intelligence gathering and analysis, and victim aftercare. We leave the 99 in pursuit of the one, and we raise our voices for the ones who can't, so that we can rejoice with heaven at their safe return. If you're not yet a shepherd, I want to ask you to consider it. A recurring gift, even the small one of an overpriced coffee that you were going to buy anyways, goes directly toward the basic care and long-term rehabilitation of victims in our areas of responsibility and in the pursuit of them. That's the trade-off that I'm asking: a little bit of your comfort for someone else's freedom and for the ability to them feel human again. So you can learn more about what we do and become a one-time or recurring shepherd at mission991.org. Thank you so much. It isn't the suffering and hardship that most people struggle with. It's the uncertainty, the committing to a deception of flowery lies to motivate their actions and decisions. That's what's bothering them. You know, soldiers are a lot like this. If you're honest with them about the conditions and the expectations, even when the situation is genuinely bleak, they don't have a problem with that. They can carry an enormous amount of weight if they understand why they're carrying it. It's when you start with the smoke and mirrors and tricks that the politicians and the brass think they want to hear that morale and order starts to break down. Look at how Afghanistan went in the years leading up to that exit. I'll leave the politics out of it, but the men and women on the ground knew what was happening long before the people making the decisions were willing to say it out loud. Just give people in uniform the respect to tell them how it is. Let them be professionals they were trained to be. Let them fulfill their purpose and put the job behind them. That principle extends way beyond the military. Most people can endure far more hardship than they think that they can if they understand why they're enduring it. That's not just true in combat, and oftentimes our youth would benefit from a little bit more of that treatment. If you treat somebody like a child, they'll act like a child. If you start treating them like a grown-up, they'll rise up to that. It's even true in marriage, in raising children, or building a business, in addiction recovery, and almost every worthwhile thing that you'll ever attempt. The suffering itself is usually not what breaks people. That feeling of, why am I doing this? What's the purpose? Why did I even show up? Carrying a burden that no longer seems connected to anything worthwhile, that's what crushes the human spirit. That's why purpose matters. Not because it makes life easier, because it makes hardship make sense and gives you a destination when you're carrying your cross. A father working a second job doesn't necessarily enjoy working a second job. Trust me, He'd rather be home with his kids. The famous country song, The Dollar by Jamie Johnson, I think it was, that line, Mama, how much does this buy me? After the kid breaks open his piggy bank is a gut check moment. It was to me. But it doesn't change the fact that the dad, he still has to go. The bills don't get paid on good feelings. But it is important to keep things in perspective. Meet the needs, but take the kid fishing over getting him the new Xbox that he thinks he needs. Or on the other side, a mother getting up 3 times a night with a newborn isn't having a great time. A business owner staring at payroll, wondering how he's going to make it in this month or next month isn't having fun. But purpose changes how those sacrifices are interpreted. The burden remains, the meanings change. And when the meaning changes, people discover reserves of strength that they didn't know they had. I've watched this in aviation. I've watched young pilots do things they were completely convinced they couldn't do. Not because they magically became more capable overnight, but because they reached a point where the mission became more important than their fear. That's when real growth happens, not when fear disappears. When something becomes more important than it and it no longer has the driver's seat. But don't forget that the only time that you're going to find that growth is when you walk into those situations where you're going to feel that fear, not by avoiding it. That's a lesson our culture desperately needs to hear right now, because we are surrounded by messages telling us to trust our feelings above everything else. If it feels hard, leave. If it's uncomfortable, avoid it. If it creates anxiety, remove it. If it challenges you, silence it. If it requires sacrifice, question whether it's really worth it. After all, if it's right for you, it would make you happy, right? God, I've grown to hate that word, happy, because so many people just don't have a clue what it is. Like in The Princess Bride, my friend, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. The problem is that almost everything worth having requires exactly those things: the anxiety, the fear, the courage to engage with it. A strong marriage requires sacrifice. A strong body requires sacrifice. A meaningful career requires sacrifice. A real relationship with God also requires sacrifice and obedience. A healthy community is no different. If you're in any of those and not feeling the sacrifice, chances are you're a freeloader. Not that there isn't sacrifice to make. The real life most people say they want is built almost entirely from things they're taught to avoid so that they can be controlled. And eventually that contradiction catches up with them. They wake up one day, successful on paper, entertained, comfortable, distracted, and completely unsure why they feel so empty, even though the bank account is full. Because comfort was never supposed to carry the weight of purpose. Comfort makes a wonderful companion. It makes a terrible God. And we have been taught to sacrifice everything on the altar of comfort. If COVID taught me nothing else, it was that most people will give up anything if you endanger their comfortable little lives. That's where discipline enters the picture. And I want to be careful about how I say this because the word gets misunderstood constantly. Lives keep borrowing words like discipline, courage, and pride to give themselves the illusion that their lives matter, while they sit at home and continue their parasitic relationship on society. Discipline is not punishment. It's not self-hatred. It's not proving how tough you are to people who are watching. Discipline is simply teaching yourself that your feelings don't get the final vote. That's it. It's okay to be hungry. You don't need the candy. It's okay to be lonely. You don't need the porn. It's okay not to have the nicest car. You don't need the loan. The word disciple and the word discipline come from the same root. Both involve submission to something greater than yourself. That's why discipline isn't actually the enemy of freedom. It's actually how you get there. A man who can't govern himself will eventually be governed by his appetites. A woman who can't govern herself will eventually be governed by her emotions. And a society that can't govern itself will eventually be governed by someone else. There are no exceptions. Bottom up, top down. And before someone takes that completely out of context, I'm not talking about becoming some robotic machine that never rests, never enjoys life. The complete opposite, actually. The most disciplined people I've been around love life the most and enjoy it the most. They're present when they're with their families because they handled what needed handling. They're able to rest when it's time to rest. They can enjoy success without being controlled by fear of the next failure. They enjoy the moment of comfort instead of being ruled by it. And that's a very different way of engaging with the world than what you're being taught by your social media feed and work training, because the real battle was never primarily out there. The enemy outside of you can only exploit what the enemy inside of you is willing to give it power over. That's been one of the hardest lessons for me in my own life. Every major drift, every time I've gotten significantly off course, I can trace it back to the same place. Not a lack of information, not a lack of opportunity, a failure of discipline, a failure of my discipline. A moment where I knew what was right and I chose something easier and justified it in some way that made it look good. A moment where comfort won the vote. And every time that has happened, the bill eventually comes due, not because God is sitting in heaven waiting to punish us, because reality has consequences. God's commands aren't arbitrary, they're instructions from the designer on the design, from a loving father who would rather see us avoid those mistakes, but a loving father who will also allow us our consequences to teach us to do better. And when you ignore the owner's manual long enough, things eventually break down. Usually you first, then the people around you, because it comes down to that nasty word people hate so much, accountability. Those lessons take time. And you might find yourself wondering if maybe you missed a boat. Maybe becoming the man or woman you can be proud of took 30, 50, maybe 60 years. Is it too late? Obviously not. Some people's best work comes later, not just a little later, a lot later. Collins, in his interview, also pointed out Benjamin Franklin as one of the better examples of this in American history. And I think Franklin gets underused because people just slap his face on things and forget to actually read the story. Or you read something that says 20 years and you just kind of blink it away. A lot can happen in that time. Franklin was a printer in his 20s. He was good at it, made a living, not the movie-worthy version of a life quite yet. In his 30s, he got serious about writing and publishing. Poor Richard's Almanac was already revealing threads of the mind that he had and what would eventually come from him. But he wasn't Benjamin Franklin the way we know him, not yet. He was still warming up. In his 40s, he turned to science, electricity, the lightning rod, something that changed how human beings understood the whole physical world. It was in his 40s that his political career also started, something that would ramp up significantly in his later years, but arguably his most consequential work, the negotiations with France that secured the alliance for American independence and the Constitutional Convention, the diplomacy that helped hold a fragile new nation together long enough for it to find its footing. 81 years old in 1787. Franklin didn't have one chapter. He had 4 or 5 distinct ones. I've often joked that I've lived multiple lives at this point because it can definitely feel that way, with each building on the last, each unlocking something new, but the old lessons remain. In Franklin's case, the printer became the publisher, became a scientist, became a statesman. The encodings were there the whole time. Different seasons brought different windows in a frame, but his attention to detail, his curiosity, and his ability to articulate the problem and then solve it all remained. Collins would say he was never reinventing himself. The encodings that he talks about, the curiosity, the clarity of thought, the ability to persuade and communicate, that drive to solve problems, those were always present. So what changed was which window frame his life was looking through. I find that genuinely encouraging, not because I think I'm Franklin. I'm just a dude working to do the next right thing. Nothing fancier than that. But because it means the story isn't written for us yet. It means that the window can shift again, which cuts both ways. There are certainly things in my life at the moment I'm frustrated with and look forward to changing at some point. But there are also things I know that I need to enjoy and cherish before they slip away in the current of changes, right? It means that the best in frame season of your life might not have even arrived yet. That research that Collins did across lives that he studied showed the same pattern: fog phases, cliff events, as he puts it, long periods of feeling out of frame, followed by seasons of remarkable clarity and output. Nobody gets a straight line. It all just kind of meanders in the same general direction as long as you keep getting out of bed every day. So if you're in a fog right now, that's totally fine. It doesn't mean you missed it. It doesn't mean you're behind. It means you're in a season that every remarkable life has ever been through. We forget that when we read stories like Franklin's, we see in his 40s and just move on. Like I said earlier, right? That's a decade, people. So much life happens in a decade: the wins, the losses, disappointment, love, laughter. The question is, what do you do while you're in it? So, what he was calling encodings, what athletes also call flow state, business people call operating in their zone, psychologists can refer to it as peak performance. I believe all of those are describing the same thing, just using different vocabularies. They're describing spiritual gifts and godly assignment. I'm not going to over theologize all of this. To me, it's obvious. The answer is God knit something specific into every person before they were born. He equipped certain individuals for certain assignments. We don't come out of the womb ready for that burden. We have to be trained up through the pain of failure and the elations of success. The work of a life is partly the work of discovering and deploying those gifts. These are simple but not easy truths that people have wrestled with for thousands of years. We don't need to reinvent that whole wheel here. It's scripture and the evidence supports it, but put it into whatever language you want. What I want you to know and hear is the wisdom in it, that living in this discipline will direct your path, not make it harder. Romans 12 talks about gifts that differ according to the grace given to each person. 1 Corinthians 12 lays out how those gifts function within a body, not for individual glory, but for the collective purpose. Ephesians 2:10 is another one that says, "We are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand." Beforehand. That word can't be skipped over. It's a commission to work in your assignment, not a holiday all-exclusive resort package. Encodings, calling, it's all the same. So many Christians avoid secular research and information because they fear it. Why? In our schools and with our kids, sure, they need time to mature, but if you are a mature and grounded believer, how will a book change your faith? Our Father welcomes our questions, and when someone as brilliant as Collins spends a lifetime observing something and delivers his findings, I want to know what he has to say. He spent a lifetime observing God's design because it's all God's design. He may not use that language, but it doesn't change anything. And the reason so many people can't find their purpose isn't because they weren't given one. It's because they've been looking for it in all the wrong places, using the wrong tools, trusting the wrong voices to confirm what they're seeing. We've outsourced our discernment to personality tests and algorithms and people who don't know us. People who don't have the authority to speak into our lives. We've let the loudest voices replace the still small ones, the ones with actual authority over our lives and impact over those that we love. Here's the thing about spiritual gifts, and I see this all the time in the church community and the community at large. I've watched people read a book and decide they've got the gift of teaching or leading, when honestly, standing back, it's pretty obvious they don't. And they'll hit that wall again and again and again stubbornly, trying to force something that was never there to begin with, making it harder for themselves and everyone around them. Mostly because the people around them are uncomfortable with conflict and have a hard time calling it out, even when it's the most kind thing to do in the moment and the thing that they should do. When if these people could just step back and get out of their own way, they would feel the peace that actually comes from living in your lane. That lane that fits you doesn't have to be forced open. It's not laying back and waiting for it to happen either, but it's also not having to live in a lie, lying to yourself mostly. Sometimes purpose is found by accepting the door that keeps opening naturally. That's a subtle difference, but it's important because purpose driven by ego looks a lot like godly purpose sometimes, or at least for a time. It just doesn't produce the same fruit. So, what do you do with all of this? First, pay attention to what keeps pulling you in, not what entertains you for the weekend, not what gets your attention scrolling through your feed. What problems do you keep finding yourself trying to solve? What responsibility keeps showing up no matter how many times you try to hand it off? What burdens do you keep picking up even when nobody has asked you to? And then test everything. If something just came to mind, you have to be brutally honest about it. Does it keep coming back to you because you're too stubborn to take the obvious loss and move on? Is it because you're a micromanager who wants to control every aspect of it and the people that you've handed it to? Or is it that you're a great speaker? Or maybe that you crave the spotlight and the attention that comes with it? Is fitness your lane, or is it a desperate attempt to ignore your body image? I could go on and on and on. But let's get very, very clear here, because purpose usually leaves evidence. Most people miss it because they're looking for that grand finale instead of the origin story. The origin story is usually quiet, unglamorous, and a little embarrassing in retrospect. So it's there that we're going to need that courage to step into it, to address those fears of failure, fears of being embarrassed. But it's in that we grow. Secondly, and this one's a little bit harder, you have to start trusting what you're seeing. Collins was really clear on that. He said 70 points out of 100 goes to trust, not discovery. We're getting clues all the time. And John Glenn's parents didn't want him flying. Job is a perfect example in the Bible where his friends and even his wife questioned his purpose and his resolve. Think about that for a second. The people who knew them best were pointing them away from the very thing that they were built for. When those men got a glimpse of their encoding, their spiritual gifts and their calling, they trusted it. They didn't let the people around them talk them out of it. And that's not arrogance. That's discipline to stay the course and weather the storm. Because the truth is, if you outsource that discernment, like I said earlier, if you allow your calling to be assigned by people, by a man or a woman in your life, then they can just as easily strip it away from you. So don't do that. Third, and I want to be very clear because it matters, some of this cannot be taught. Some of it has to be lived. Some lessons have to be lived, as uncomfortable or difficult as they might be. You can read every book on suffering and still not know what it produces in you until you actually step into it. You can study courage academically and still not know if you have it until you're standing at the edge of something that costs you something. You got to put skin in the game, and you push forward anyway. What will you do when you get punched in the face? That's a old school one, but honestly, if you've never been in a ring, and I highly recommend that you do at some time in your life, then you simply can't know. So there's head knowledge and there's heart knowledge. Colin said the same thing, just in his own way. You can do years and years of academic schooling, 10 MBAs under your belt, and still not be encoded for something that requires actual field experience to discover. And if you've ever been in a workplace, you know the difference. You can spot it a mile away. The ones that, maybe look good on the resume versus the guy that's been doing it for 15 years and he just knows. So stop waiting to have it all figured out before you make a move. The clarity usually comes after that step, not before it. Moving toward the things that are pulling you in. Take that next step, the next right thing, and then the next one. Pay attention to what lights you up and what's draining you, and then trust the data. A pilot doesn't need to see the entire route to know the next heading, And a ship captain doesn't need to see the port destination to make a course correction. He just needs to know where he is now, where he's trying to go, and what adjustments need to happen right now. Then he continues to evaluate. It's not a set and forget. You're not stuck in your decision or the next move for a lifetime. It's all just making a move, having the courage to step into it, and then reevaluating as you go with an end state in mind, not making it random and certainly not allowing other people to make those decisions for you. Most of you already know what that adjustment is. You just don't like the answer, all right? You don't like it. And if you're listening to this right now, feeling a little bit lost, a little stuck, a little further behind than you think you should be, I want to be clear about something before I let you go. You're not behind. You're just warming up. Paul writes in Ephesians 2:10, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand, that we should walk in them." Workmanship, prepared beforehand, that we should walk in them. So, not stumble across them eventually, not manufacture them ourselves and become our own little g gods. Walk in his plan. The encodings, to use that language, were already placed inside of you before you ever took your first breath. That's not a push down easy street. It's a commission to get to work. There's a huge difference there. And in the same letter, Paul tells the church of Corinth something that every high performer in the room will immediately recognize, even if they've never opened a Bible in their life. He says in 1 Corinthians 9, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable one. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air." I do not run aimlessly. That phrase right there. That's what every elite athlete, every operator, every high performer is chasing when they talk about their flow state, when they talk about being in the zone. And Collins talks about being in frame. It's the same thing. The absence of aimlessness, the clarity that comes from training, your assignment, and the moment that you're standing in, all of it lines up at the same time. And Paul isn't describing a feeling. He's describing a disciplined, intentional choice to run toward something specific and not waste your stride. That fog that Collins found in every remarkable life he studied, that wasn't failure. It was part of the training up. People who built extraordinary lives could lose a decade in that fog, and the window shifted and they were out of frame, but those encodings were still there, and the window shifted again. So if you're in that fog right now, that's not a sentence of failure on your life. It's a season. The man who fulfills his purpose is not usually the most talented man in the room. He's often the one that just stayed in the fight longer than everybody else did, who kept showing up and improving and adjusting. So that stubbornness, that's really the only thing I got going for me. But that person is also someone who repented when he got off course and didn't build an identity out of that being a victim, who refused to run aimlessly even when he couldn't see the finish line. So pay attention to that thread. Look back over your life honestly, not overly charitably, and ask, what keeps showing up? What problems pull at you? What responsibilities seem to find you, whether you've invited them or not? That pattern is data, so don't shrug it off. Trust what you're already seeing. The problem for most people and most of us isn't that we're not getting information back. It's that we don't trust it when we do. Start acting on the glimpses you've already been given. Test them. Crawl, walk, run, and then make a move. Not toward a grand reinvention of yourself, toward the responsibility that you've already been directly given in front of you today. Be faithful with that. More gets revealed and discovered along the way, not from your present comfortable position. You don't have to solve the next 20 years before dinner, okay? But you do have to take the next right step, and then the next one after that, because the work was prepared beforehand. You're not inventing the path, you're walking in it. And God's support is there if you call on it. This is in no way meaning that he's going to do it for you, but trust that you are strong enough. So walk. And I'll leave you with that until next time. Barbarians, hold the line. Don't compromise the truth. and run the race like you mean it.